Hello, it's Thursday, March 26th, and it would be a B day if we were still in school. And the topic for today's video is theme, not theme songs. And if I had a theme song, I'm not quite sure what it would sound like. Most likely weird. But anyway, we're talking about theme in literature. And when we're talking about theme in literature, we're talking about the big idea of the story. Some sort of overarching message about life. Something that the story is attempting to say about the general human condition, right? And sometimes for students, when we talk about theme, it can be a little confusing and hard to get to, because when an author writes, they usually don't spell out the theme of a story in capital letters on the page, right? It's not like in the subtitle of the book, although I guess maybe there is an author who's done that before. I'm not quite sure if I know of any, but typically you have to figure it out based on what's going on in the story. You have to look at plot details. You have to look at the words of the characters. You have to look at what's going on in the story to try to figure out what it is that the author is trying to convey about human life. And there's important things we need to understand about theme before we start looking for it in a story, right? So number one, themes are generally universal, right? It's a universal statement about life. And number two, they're typically unrelated to specific cultural ideas, right? So they typically transcend or go beyond cultural barriers so that anybody can understand or relate to the theme. So that's a big piece of it. And, there's two different categories really that we can break theme down into. So we can break it down into a thematic concept, right? And when we talk about thematic concept, what we're really talking about is what the story is about, right? So like the thematic concept of Restart, a novel that my students read at the beginning of the year, we're talking about a story about a student who gets to restart their life after having an injury and getting amnesia, right? So that's what the story is about. But there's also the thematic statement, and that's really what we're talking about in this video. And that's what the story or the work is trying to talk about or tell you about life, okay? And that one's more important in a lot of ways, because this is where an author gets to make a statement, where he or she gets to make some kind of claim. And for my students, I'm trying to tie that into things we've done in terms of writing, where they try to make a claim about the human condition, about what life is like in the world. And typically, there are a list of themes that you see that are recurring, right? Because remember, they're universal. So it would make sense that you'd see the themes be recurring. And typically, depending on the age range of the novel you're reading, you tend to find very similar ones, right? So some common themes you see in literature: the loss of innocence, the impact of that on people as they grow up. So, when you read a story where a character has experienced something traumatic and it changes him or her, right? They go through this event and then they come out on the other side fundamentally different. They've stripped away their innocence, their naive view of the world, and they've come out more cynical or jaded. And that theme of losing one's innocence is a pretty common theme in literature. The theme of over-reliance on technology leading to disaster or dystopia. And, that's a very common theme nowadays. I'm sorry, there's like cat hair brushing around my face. That's a very common theme that we see a lot in young adult novels. It was a big piece of some rather famous recent books, and, books that traditionally have been read in school. Think of Brave New World or Fahrenheit 451 or 1984, where that idea of society being improved by technology, but it really leading to the ruin of human life, essentially, or the Terminator movies, right? Because those have cool robot skeletons. So theme in literature tends to talk about these overarching things and give you a message about that. So when you're looking for theme, you try to look for major events. Look at what's happening to your protagonist, your main character. Look at what happens in the climax of the story. Look at what builds up to it. Look at some recurring images. Tie that into another video we've talked about before, and see if you notice a pattern of events throughout the story, right? So that you can start to piece together an overarching picture. So in some of those other pieces, like, for example, the novel 1984 by George Orwell, a book that becomes more and more nonfiction, unfortunately, as we move on in life, there's this constant theme of technology being intrusive and taking away from personal freedoms and personal liberties. So that can be happening in the side. So as Winston starts explaining or describing his daily life, we start hearing about these things. The screens on the wall monitoring what he's doing and the exercises and so forth. Very similar to Fahrenheit 451 with the idea of the giant screens in the homes talking about people and the main character, his wife, just like zoning out watching these things. And we see those little pieces where the technology kind of strips away our humanity. So those recurring images, and we can start to pick apart a theme that's occurring in those stories. So that's one of the things we can do when we're trying to figure out theme. It's not something that can be necessarily easy, but if we practice it and start, looking for those things, it'll get easier over time. And, my students read recently the story The Flowers by Alice Walker, and it's a prime example of that loss of innocence. And in that story, Alice Walker uses a bit of symbolism to really convey that theme, because the character Mayap, as she's strolling through the woods, comes across the remains of a man who appears to have been lynched. So there is a rotting, decaying body. There is the fraying remains of a noose. And as Mayap observes it and sees what is there and puts it together, the story mentions that she puts her flowers down. And then the last line of the story is that the summer is over. Now, obviously, literally, when she put the flowers down, it wasn't like the clock changed over and, it changed into autumn. It was symbolic that the idea of summer, that carefree time period, which is symbolic of childhood, is now gone. Going back to that thematic piece of loss of innocence, that loss of childhood. Now Mayap can't live carefree. She has now learned of the evils of men, and by extension of that, one of the most evils of men, racism. So the theme there is portrayed through that symbolic piece at the end of the story. So very quick theme in literature. Thank you for watching. If we're going to try to extend this to our lives, hopefully the theme of your lives is one of it's important to persevere regardless of how difficult time might seem. And that's one that I hope you are working towards, and I'm hoping that I can see the evidence of your successfully living that out in your communications with me, and I look forward to that. Look forward to more videos. I hope these are at least marginally useful to you, and if not useful, at least maybe you can watch these and learn what not to do when trying to educate people through videos. Thank you. My strange allergic reaction to whatever soap I used is starting to get better. That's why I don't look so much like Rudolph, and I hope you all are doing well too. Until next time, be good and take care.